if you don't define what a successful life is for yourself, somebody else will.
Welcome to Let's Design Change, the Blue Mood podcast. We are delighted to have you here. I'm your host, Teresa Niubó. We aim to create a community of change makers that are willing to face transformation from a human-centered approach. Together, we'll explore inspiring stories about leadership, innovation, and how to tackle change from a human-centric perspective. Stay tuned and join us as we explore the power of shaping our world. Let's design change. I'm your host, Teresa Niubó, and today we have a fascinating guest with us, Adam Weiler. Thank you, Adam, for being here with all of us today.
Hello, Teresa. It's so good to be here.
Yes. I met Adam at Stanford University, where he was my mentor while I was studying design thinking at the d.school. And I am absolutely thrilled to have you here, Adam. Thank you for making the time for our conversation. Welcome. Adam, could you please introduce yourself?
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Adam Weiler. I'm currently the design director at an organization called Flywheel, and we're really helping communities write their next chapter in the midst of affordable housing crises that are happening not just here in Michigan, but all over. My background is varied. I studied fine art and mathematics in my undergrad. I had gotten my master's in design, theory and practice, and have always been, I think, more intrigued by the social side and implications of design rather than the specific product or service. And so a lot of my work has been inside of social service and thinking about whether it be creating a summer camp exposing high school students to new ways of careers, or working inside of a corporate environment, thinking about talent pipeline development and nurturing alternative forms of talent sourcing. And really excited to be here and talk about, let's design some change. So
Thank you. Before we dive in all of that, I know that you have just come back home after a long sabbatical, traveling around the world. You and your wife have been in so many amazing places, from Mexico, New Zealand, Japan, Turkey, to Austria, Denmark, Ireland, and now back to the US. What a blast. I'm eager to hear more about your experience, and what could you share with us?
Yeah. Well, maybe let me I think in the conversation about design, a preliminary question for me is just how am I meeting my own needs and the needs of my wife, and also contributing to a more vibrant community. So we were in a place, my wife was sick for a little while. She has a clean bill of health now, but for 3 years, it was pretty consistent pain. And I think that that's something that you take health for granted, and your ideas of progress can be theoretical and always other until you have something like that. And then you're like, man, how can we just, like, being grateful for health and presence is second to none. And so we came to this point where we were like, something in our lives need to change. We now can't have kids. And so many of the predetermined ideas of success that one might inherit from their community no longer matter or are relevant to you. And so it was like, we got to take some time to discover our own story and the things that and sort of define what success looks like for us in this next chapter. So it was a really beautiful time to visit so many communities and see how they operate and express themselves in the built environment. And it was really, really wonderful. So
it sounds fantastic. It sounds amazing. And Adam, some time ago, after I returned from my gap period in the USA, we had a video call. And during that conversation, you asked me a question that I have never forgotten. And I want to ask you now the same thing. Should I go ahead?
I mean, absolutely.
So the question,
YOLO. No, you,
yeah,
you, the, I have just, I've just turned 42, and I think the faster, when you're a kid, you have these aspirations of what life can be, or
yeah,
questions about it. And the older you get, it's sort of uh, I'm not going to be a professional cyclist or a professional soccer player. And so all
so
of these things kind of like the aperture of possibility shrinks a little bit and a little bit and a little bit in some ways. In other
yeah,
ways, it broadens and broadens and broadens. But I
yeah,
think the only way to do something different with your life is to do something different. And that's
that's
scary
really,
and
yeah.
exciting and risky.
So, yeah, and you know, as I was saying, the question that you asked me at that time was, you were asking to me to take you through the emotional arc I
Mm,
had experienced from deciding my sabbatical. And that's why I was wondering, could you take us
mm,
through the emotional arc you have experienced from deciding to take this sabbatical until now?
yeah. If we were to think about the peaks and valleys, I think overall there were, I'll maybe do high points and low points, okay?
Yeah,
So a high point was thinking about a key milestone. We knew that we had enough money saved that we could do at least 3 months. Um, and then the question was, if we can rent our house, does that enable us to go extend the trip? And so the emotional, that was sort of a large determining factor, was like,
yeah,
okay, financially, how long can we make this work?
yeah,
We're going to try to take great photographs of our
yeah.
home. We're going to post it. And we said it's flexible anywhere from 3 to 9 months.
Wow.
And you put it up there, and there's the initial worry of, oh man, is this going to happen? Does our timeline happen to align with somebody else's? And it wasn't more than a week later. And so, in the midst of that, there's a lot of anxiety. We had developed a bunch of different sort of branching diagrams of if then scenarios with
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Mm-hmm.
locations and counterplans and counterplans. And then, not a week later, somebody had reached out and said, I'll take it for 6 months. And then that was sort of like all of that anxiety of the unknown
Yeah, yeah,
crystallized into, oh, this is what we have to work with now. And then it's just a matter of putting the pieces together to say, where can we stay with friends for cheap or for free?
yeah.
Where are the places that we want to go? How do we scratch the itch of going places that we've always wanted to go with
Mm-hmm.
um, staying inside of the budget? And so you're making
Yeah,
compromises all the
yeah,
while,
yeah,
and trying to figure out, yeah, how to make the most of
yeah.
it. So
It's,
arcs of, will this happen? Will it not happen? How long?
yeah,
Um,
I
do you want
can,
me to like into the
yeah,
trip? I feel like inside of the trip, then it was so, I was honestly really nervous. I find myself to be a workaholic, and a lot of my identity has been wrapped up inside of
yeah,
work for a long time. And so the idea that is a dominant cultural narrative that had been ingrained. And so I was quite nervous of, would I be okay? Will Jenna be okay? Will our relationship be
yeah,
okay
yeah,
apart from
absolutely.
that?
Yeah,
And so the first few weeks were kind of like rough, learning to step away from that productive mindset and just learning to be present.
yeah,
But eventually we found our rhythm, which was really nice. And now I feel like I have a renewed
absolutely. I
vision
can
and
imagine.
relationship to work.
imagine. I can imagine. And in my case, it was a game changer. When I came back, I decided to set up by my own and to set up my own business. So when you take these gap periods, you think a lot of what you really want. That's what made me decide what to do, what I'm doing right now. So I can imagine for you and your wife, how has it been? Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. And now let's talk about your work. You define yourself as a social impact designer. Could you tell us a bit more about your journey to becoming an expert on this field?
Yeah. There's always, I think, this tension of how do I make a life that's good for me and good for the world, not at the world's expense. I think a lot of the energy that I've tried to put out into the world has been in my early days, attempting to solve problems that I had experienced as a young person and thinking, oh, how do I help, an 18-year-old, a 17-year-old, a 15-year-old who's creative and trying to find themselves, but they might not necessarily understand what's out there. And so the start of it was really, I was working as a program director in a local organization, and we were doing a lot of after-school youth programming. Yeah. And out of that was like, man, we should make a summer camp for kids. They're expressing themselves in all kinds of interesting ways. How do we outfit them with tools? And so we had recruited a painter and a poet and a photoshopper and a photographer. Yeah. And just over the series of weeks, sort of outfitted students with some tools and then challenged them to use whatever medium that they had resonated most with to say something significant. And we created a zine, which is a little mini magazine. And the product in and of itself was really, it wasn't award-winning, but it was so beautiful because of the conversations that it brought up, the relational trust, the agency, the sense of empowerment to build and create something and address an issue that I care deeply about. It was really beautiful. And that sort of snowballed into an after-school club that we had started with 6 students, and then it grew into 30 students, and eventually we were serving around 300 students per year through different after-school, out-of-school time workshops, and really with that goal of increasing. I don't know if you want. Some might call it creative confidence or the ability of students, like how do I better understand myself and put myself out in the world? So we would do workshops in illustration or screen printing, graphic design, songwriting, video recording, all these kinds of things. And that snowballed into that sort of what emerged out of these youth training programs was really an employment program. And so some of our students, we were had needed jobs. And so we were doing graphic design and printmaking during the day. And so we started hiring some of our students to help with ordering of like fulfillment. And
it's amazing when you are working with this kind of students and children that they are so eager to learn, and whatever you provide, it's like exponential. So I can imagine how has been this project and all this work for you, for sure.
Yeah, and I think a big part of it is you're born into this world, and not often do you realize like, oh, this is how it's actually made. Like this is how people are actively making and shaping the world. And there's an American movie, Wizard of Oz, in that moment when, I don't know if you've seen that old movie where the wizard is kind of control there. Oh my gosh, let me pause for a second and get the story straight, because it was written like a half an hour west of where we are right now. So Dorothy and this group are on this sort of pilgrimage to visit this wizard. There's this large sort of spectacle of a wizard, but they have this little dog who sort of like is barking around this panel off to the side. Only pulls back the curtain to reveal that the wizard is not this big mystical thing, but it's this guy who's controlling the machine who makes the wizard look really big. And I think those behind the scenes moment where you start to understand like, oh, this is how decisions get made, or this is how products are developed, this is how objects are produced,
Mm.
is so powerful.
Mm.
It was a really
Yeah,
powerful thing for me. And it seems to be a really
yeah,
powerful thing for young people as we're
absolutely.
producing things and they're seeing their work across town, or
Yeah.
people purchasing their work for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's been a real delight.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And as you know, I work on projects, on many projects where we help companies to transform, which sometimes can be challenging. I wonder if you could elaborate how to help teams navigate to the pain of change and how to achieve impactful results. What would
Hmm.
be those tips that we could provide teams that are navigating in these pain points of change?
hmm The first thing that comes to my mind is I don't know if you can talk about change without talking about grief. Like
Mm.
there's gain, there's a lot to be gained inside of change, but there's a lot of emotional loss that can happen inside of that.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And when a friend was transitioning roles, there were a lot of really great things that she was sort of like leaving behind. And one of the things I would think about is rituals. Like, what kind of rituals around grief in change could you design for your team to
Mm.
help emotionally process and leave things behind? So for my friend, one of the things that I had done was designed a bit of a threshold. I had created I took a bunch of streamers. Um, I made this sort of like tunnel that was coming out of an elevator
Yeah.
with some reflection prompts that were, hey, you're coming from this space and you're moving into this new space.
Yeah.
What are the things from your past that you're excited to bring with you? What are you sad to let go of? Um, but I think just like honoring the loss that happens inside of change is one thing we can do as leaders, to say if we need new behaviors, inevitably there's loss from leaving the old behaviors behind. So
Yeah.
how do you more fully acknowledge the human experience inside of that?
I really like your approach and this perspective of grief. Also, in my experience, taking an iterative approach to change makes the process more adaptive and less overwhelming. When you are trying with this approach of thinking that it has not to be the right approach upfront, that you are trying and error and adapting. That's a good way also to overcome those difficulties. Yeah.
Mm.
And you have worked at the Steelcase, the leading manufacturer of furniture for offices, hospitals, and schools, as global manager in social innovation. Please, please tell us about a specific project where the application of design thinking had an impact on the output.
Yeah. The project that comes to my mind most is a communal effort that had happened inside of COVID
Yeah.
19. So I had started, just for context, I had started my role. It's an incredible team, the social innovation team at Steelcase. I love. Started it on March 1st of
Wow.
2020, and my boss Kim had come over from Germany to help sort of like onboard me, and we were together for maybe
Three
three
days
days, and then
almost.
all of a sudden
Yeah.
it's like,
And then the
yeah, the
pandemic
borders are
race.
closing. It's
Yeah.
yeah. And the role was originally, I think there was supposed to be, I was so excited. It was going to be 50% global travel, working with teams all around to sort of
Yeah.
reimagine how a team in Mexico or India is working and interacting and identifying projects in the community. And then all of a sudden it's like,
Wow.
oh,
No
that's
traveling.
not happening
Yeah.
anymore. You got to reimagine. You got to reimagine what this thing is. And so one of the needs that emerged in our community is youth employment. There were a lot of students who were pretty in families that were pretty harshly affected. And the idea became, could there be a communal wide effort to employ 1,000 students in Grand Rapids? And Steelcase was one of the early adopters of that, and they said, hey, we'll hire 50
Wow.
students. And so the challenge was, when everybody is working remotely, what can you do to employ 50 high school students over the course of 6 weeks? And there's an incredible network of community partners and an incredible network of employees. And we were entertaining, like, well, what are different ways we could do this? Do we have students shadow an individual? But then that felt, as we were discussing with folks, it's like, man, how would you feel if all of a sudden you have a virtual shadow that you have for 20 hours a week? What are you going to do with them? There's benefits to it. You get to know this person really well. But there's also social differences to be considered, social, emotional, or cross-cultural training. And so what we ended up doing is coming up with a program where students would be charged with working as a team to reimagine a post-life product of a steel case excess material. And so there's a super cool company in town called Public Thread that works to upcycle old industrial materials. They turn them into bags. It's really great. They get a lot of byproducts from places like Wolverine Worldwide or Steelcase. And instead, we started challenging different departments to develop a half-day workshop experience. So over the course of 6 weeks, students gained exposure to like 12 different career pathways. Each of these departments sort of championed their day. And they went through a development cycle, everything from user research to product design and prototyping, engineering, manufacturing, supply chain analysis. I'm trying to think of what else. Marketing, strategy. How is your product going to be different from others? And we worked sort of like hybrid. So there were times where we go in sort of spread out teams to do the prototyping work at Public Thread. And it was just super fun to see at the end of it, you have, 6 different student teams who are pitching their ideas for new product that was made out of old upholstery fabric. It was really cool. And students, when they first thought that they were going to be employed by this furniture manufacturer, they were like, oh, are we going to be working on the line? They were like not unsure. And it was really nice to have a bunch of them say like, hey, this was the best summer job that I've had.
Well,
so that's one. And part of the goal of that is like cultivating new talent pipelines. Like, what is the role? It's one thing as a corporation to say like, hey, this is what we need of our colleges to do or develop X or Y or Z. But it's another thing to say, hey, how are we stoking the interest and appetite of students in our community to become, the next generation of creative leaders?
That's amazing.
So I was really, really
That's absolutely amazing. And I know about the steel case because I always would love to have that products in my offices. But I also know about the innovation approach that they took towards the different challenges that they are facing. So it's amazing what you were doing in order to nourish this pipeline of new talent. So that's amazing. And I wanted to take the opportunity also to talk with you about empathy. So empathy is often highlighted as a critical component of human-centered design. Always when I work with my clients, I always see the need to spend time really exploring the problem by empathizing with the person we are designing for. And I wonder, how do you ensure that empathy is effectively integrated into your design processes?
I think over time, you can cultivate what some people might call informed intuition. And there's moments that's useful, and there's other moments where that can undercut your understanding of people's feelings. And so I feel like at the beginning of a project, making sure that you build in critical moments where you're getting out of your own perspective to know and understand the lived experiences of others. Right now, I'm working on a few projects. One is around affordable housing, and a lot of that is helping communities identify and wrestle with the change of housing and development patterns that need to happen in order to build more affordable housing. And I think a big chunk of that is for my own self. Like, I was just on a flight back from California this past week, listening and hearing the stories of a person who lives in a community north of us who's really wrestling with affordable housing, and just taking time to ask open, story-oriented questions to understand her feelings on the pressures, the perception of what government leaders are doing, the perception of development, the intended or unintended consequences of what might happen. And it's really just, I guess, centering who the people are that you're designing for, understanding their fears and aspirations, and kind of identifying moments where you need to reconcile your idea of what reality is with their lived experience.
I like this concept of reconciling your idea, because sometimes we are coming to a project with a lot of previous thoughts that we think that are true. So in
Teresa,
the projects.
On that note, Teresa, can I maybe say one thing? Shane Parrish, I believe in his book on great mental models, he runs Farnham Street, which is a great series of podcasts and media. He talks about that there are these three things that we need to understand as we're approaching problems. The first is that, like, we don't solve problems as they are in the world. We solve them as they are in our minds. And how do we go about reconciling our ideas of the problems with how they are in the real world? And there's three things that get in the way. One is our ego, another is distance, and another is perspective. And I think to what you were saying about empathy, is empathy challenges all that, or a good design process challenges all that. Like, how do we set aside our ego? How do we look at a problem from a bunch of different perspectives? And how do we seek perspective and get closer to the problem or solve it at the right level? That issue of distance.
Yeah, that's right. And what I also do in this kind of projects, I ask the teams to spend some days in the field and being with the people that we are really dealing with the challenge that we are designing, or also observing, or also listening to the different stakeholders, or conducting interviews, or holding focus groups. All of that are crucial exercises to gain insights that we need to reframe the challenge definition. So that's many of the different exercises that can be done when you want to really empathize with the person that you are designing for. And I also remember that you once said that to ask better questions, we can start with, how do I? It's very simple and powerful way to identify compelling problems. Could you give us some tips on how to formulate powerful questions that lead towards innovative solutions?
I think my favorite question to ask is, it originated from this gentleman named Neil Postman, who wrote a book called Technopoly. And in it, he says there are 7 questions we should ask of any new emerging technology. The first one is, what is the problem to which this technology is a solution? And I think that question, if you were to abstract it in additional level, anytime somebody is proposing a new endeavor, the underlying aspiration is that whatever this new thing is will make the current situation better, but being really clear on defining, this is the problem to which we are attempting to make a solution, can be a great way for teams to step back and get some distance from the assumed idea of what you're trying to create. So just asking that initial question of, like, hey, what is the problem to which we think this thing is going to be the solution true? That's probably one of my favorite questions to ask.
I love it. And one approach that I use is what in Spanish we call the AEO framework, which in English is the AEIOU framework for asking questions, where A stands for activities, E for environment, I for interactions, O for objects, and U for users. And I found it very useful in many, many projects. So just with this framework of looking at the challenge that you are working on from this different perspective of activities, environment, interactions that are taking place, objects that the users are using, and the users themselves. It's for me, it's a really useful framework to really explore and understand better what's going on and what the interactions that are happening.
Teresa, that's a really beautiful framework, and I like how simple it is to remember with AEIOU.
Yeah.
We're working on a project right now around college access and from what might historically be overlooked communities. And one of the things that I'm really excited about, and I might steal from you, is asking questions to sort of have that frame in mind. So as I think about the transition from high school to college, in retrospect or looking forward, what are those activities, environments, interactions, and objects? What are the places that produce the most friction or the most anxiety? That's really nice.
Yes, it's very useful for me. And going a bit deeper also, it's well known that companies that are putting design at the center of their strategy tend to perform better. So taking this creative problem-solving approach leads to a more innovative solution. How do you think that we can help people to think like designers?
A lesson that I learned, he's a director of strategy at a hypersonic rocket company in the States, is that any proposed solution is reliant on a series of assumptions, right? This is what we assume needs to be true. And I think to sort of embrace that design mindset is to at least build a first level muscle of awareness of the assumptions so that you can really quickly learn whether or not the thing you're making is the right thing to be making. And so that's maybe just one lesson that I would say is surfacing the assumptions and knowing which of those are indeed set in stone and or where is there more room to play.
Yeah, fantastic. So last but not least, Adam, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Oh, man. If you don't define what a successful life is for yourself, somebody else will. Wow. If you don't define it, somebody else will. And I would like to give myself permission to follow my curiosity. And those are the two things that I think right now, it's not just my younger self, but I think myself at 42, I would like to give myself that advice.
You are practicing.
Yeah, it's
beautiful to see that you are already practicing this advice. It's really beautiful. Yeah.
It's as relevant now as it's ever been. And maybe it's especially relevant because we do find ourselves at a time where so many of the existing paradigms, whether it be, have led to pretty destructive environmental outcomes.
Yeah.
And if we unquestioningly, what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, if we just accept whatever those terms are without thinking critically about them, we're just going to keep getting more of the same outcomes.
Yeah, you're right.
And so I think that ability of a company to to reimagine what success looks like is useful.
I love it. Okay, well, Adam, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a great conversation. It's always a pleasure talking to you and having you on the show. So thank you, Adam, so much. It's really a privilege to have you here.
It's been a real treat, Teresa. And one of the things I would love to do, I had, in closing, can I maybe share something?
Sure.
I don't know if I've shared this with
please.
you. So there's a beautiful book called Designing Your Life. Actually,
Yes,
we've
I
talked
know.
about this during your sabbatical time.
Yeah,
And one of the things that my partner and I had done over the course of the sabbatical was starting asking those questions. We have a wonderful friend who had helped lead and guide us through some of those workshops. And I had actually captured some of those prompts via journals. And I would love to maybe just share the spreads
please.
of journals where it's like the intentions, the objects, the things that were sparking my curiosity. And those sort of helped, I think, define, hey, what do I want out of this chapter? What's the kind of communal
Exactly.
impact? Who are the kind of people that I would like to be working with? So I'll share those
Yes,
just in
please.
your
Thank
show
you.
notes as an extra
Yes,
resource.
and we will
Yeah.
include it to our listeners. So we'll include it as well. Thank you so much for your generosity. So to our listeners, thank you for joining us today. If you want to learn more, be sure to check out Adam's work and follow him on LinkedIn. Tune in next time for Let's Design Change, the Blue Mood podcast. And don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. We'll come back with more episodes. Take care, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this transformative journey. If you have enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and share Let's Design Change with fellow changemakers. Are you in the middle of a business transformation? Transforming organizations to grow is our passion. If you would like to explore how we could help you, let's talk. Drop me a line or contact us on LinkedIn and Instagram. You will find the link to our website and social media, as well as those of our guests, at the end of this episode. Keep fostering your leadership, innovating, and igniting change. Let's design change.